I have said many times on this channel that most of League's earlier champions were designed around typical fantasy tropes and archetypes. Characters or creatures you would find in plenty of swords and sorcery settings. You had your knights, your minotaurs, your golems, your liches, you get the idea. Now, despite my tone, this isn't inherently a bad thing. All characters are based off of some kind of framework, and to say that League's earlier champions had nothing going for them beyond their concept would be doing them a disservice. Even so, there wasn't much to these characters beyond their archetypes. Kale was pretty much exactly what you'd expect from an angel, Warwick was exactly what you'd expect from a werewolf, and so on. Nowadays, League tries to be a little more creative with how it uses these core archetypes. Kale is more of a demigod with a god complex than a typical angel, and Warwick is now a cyborg werewolf. There was one champion that did something a little more unique with his archetype on introduction, though. One character with both a somewhat unique backstory and a slightly unusual design for his kind. I am, of course, talking about League's resident treant, before Ivern, Maokai. Maokai was released in 2011. His original bio paints him not as a natural creature in the world of Runeterra, but as a result of different magics mutating a tree on the Twisted Treeline map. Now, I've made it abundantly clear in the past that I've always hated champion bios that try to explain away their existence as random magic slash energy slash chemicals mixed to make their existence possible. It's a cheap and lazy way to explain a character's origin, and also needlessly convoluted. And Maokai is no exception. But I've always felt like he was the best execution of this concept, even if the concept is, in my opinion, inherently flawed. Basically, Maokai hated being self-aware. The magics that transformed him made him walk and talk like a person, and he considered himself an abomination as a result. He even tied a lantern to one of his branches as a sort of mark of shame. And Maokai's entire motivation in the old bio was to find a way to go back to being a normal tree. When you think about it, Maokai was almost like a predecessor to what the Void is now. A living entity who hates his own sapience and wants to revert back to a less conscious form. In exchange for becoming a champion, the summoners were supposed to help him with that goal. Of course, things would need to change after the Great Retcon hit. Maokai, like many champions, would be reinvented into the new Runeterra once the Summoners and the Institute of War were made non-canon. Maokai arguably had one of the smoother transitions into the new lore, partially because his VGU was sort of unique. It's a bit complicated to explain, but Maokai would basically receive little mini updates to become what he is now, rather than a single big overhaul all at once. His design, lore, and gameplay would all be altered in different patches, for one reason or another. Maokai's new lore paints him as a nature spirit dwelling on the Blessed Isles. In fact, he was possibly the first living creature to dwell there, watching the islands transform from a rocky outcropping in the ocean into a seedbed for plants and animals alike. When humans eventually arrived and settled the island, Maokai actually got along decently well with them, in a rare change of pace. They seemed to respect nature well enough, even if he had some reservations about their civilization, and some even revered Maokai as a guardian deity of sorts. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to safeguard them from the ruination. You know, Viego's army probably would have had a lot more trouble reaching the Waters of Life if Maokai had shown up to help in that battle. But I digress. Even once the Black Mist surged forth and started corrupting everything in its path, Maokai stood his ground. He absorbed what he could from the underground well springs and stored whatever remained of the pure waters of life in his wooden body. Because of this, you could argue that Maokai is the last true living resident of the Blessed Isles. Even Yorick is technically in a weird state of being half undead, but Maokai is filled with enough healing waters to resist the ruination entirely. In fact, he can even use it to sprout new life, which is exactly what he's been doing for the last several centuries. Amidst the endless howls of tortured souls, Maokai has been slowly but surely trying to regrow the forests of the Blessed Isles. It seems like an impossible task, but as they say, nature finds a way. He's been able to steadily cultivate saplings and flowers that can take root even in tainted soil, as well as create other nature spirits? I don't know, it's really unclear what the Blighted Caretaker's deal is supposed to be. That aside, though, Maokai's update is a prime example of a rework done right. He maintains a lot of elements from his original design, but changes enough to make him feel a bit more streamlined and coherent. It's also a relatively unique design for a Treant type character, though the loincloth is still a little weird, and I'm not sure I like what that implies. In a way, despite the fact that his voice lines and personality are near identical to when he was first released, Maokai as he is now is almost the exact opposite character we started with. While his original incarnation saw him suffering from a major existential crisis and, in a way, wanting to end his own existence, the current Maokai persists against all odds for the sake of one day reclaiming what was lost. The old Maokai didn't really care one whit about humanity and only helped them so long as they continued working to restore him to his former self. The new Maokai is a little distrusting of humans after the ruination, but he's willing to go out of his way to help them when he sees the potential good in someone like Braum during the Ruined King game. It's only a shame he was nowhere to be seen in the final battle against Viego, but there are plenty of characters in that event that were cut out for no reason, so we won't go into it. Frankly, Maokai is one of many characters suffering from drastic underutilization. But he's still arguably one of the most unique champions in the entire Shadow Isles cast. I only hope that someday we'll get to see more of his Garden Bloom.